They need to think of their business as a complete package so that everything can succeed.
That first impression is really critical.
Strong design is something brands need to have so that they stand out in the digital space.
Having the ability to tell a story, serve a purpose, and evoke emotion is what will make you stand out, and also just knowing what your competitors are doing.
Bird's Eye View.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Bird's Eye View. I'm, as usual, really excited to have you joining us today. I'm going to bring on a special guest who's another Skylarite. He is somebody who's one of our designers, a senior creative artist. He's somebody who's responsible for much of the beautiful art that goes out there that's got the Skylar name associated with it. And I'm just going to jump right into it, and I'm going to welcome to the show. So Matthew Senra, senior creative artist at Skylar Media. Welcome to Bird's Eye View.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Happy to be here.
As some people on the inside know, but on the outside wouldn't know, you often act as my representative at Skylar. So I'm thinking, why don't you do the interview today instead of me? How do you feel about that?
I will take it from here, Kyle. You can just kind of log off. It's okay. I got it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Matt has a unique sense of humor. He's a great asset around Skylar, not just with the work that he does, but with the personality and a sense of humor that he brings to the table. Matt, you've been part of the design team as a creative artist, now a senior creative artist for almost 3 years, I guess. But you've always been a designer. So why don't you tell us, where did your interest and passion in graphic design come from, and what started your journey, in that field?
For me, I've always had a passion for art, and I've always had an obsession with technology. Even to this day, I'm a huge tech geek. So for me, graphic design was kind of like that beautiful union between art and design. And it was really something that I was really passionate about. So that's kind of why I pursued a career. And honestly, I have no regrets. It's been amazing. And I can see myself doing it for the next 50 years.
Well, you have a 50-year contract with Skylar, so I mean, we'll certainly hold you to that. But yeah, certainly. I mean, you are a tech guy, and you've got that art, and I think that blending those two things together is certainly something that we see that comes out in your work quite often, especially as it relates to digital and video. I guess just so that our audience can keep up with the industry terminology, why do we call you a creative artist instead of simply just a graphic designer?
Well, I think the term graphic designer has definitely evolved over the years. I mean, if you were talking about a graphic designer back in the day who was a printmaker or solely just designing or developing graphics or symbols, I mean, nowadays in the world that we live in, which is more of a digital ecosystem, like graphic design is it can be so many different things depending on who you're talking about and which design you're applying it to. I think the creative artist aspect kind of is a bit more ambiguous, and a little bit more general to what represents what I do at Skylar. So you already know this, out of all the people, I wear so many different hats. I might be working on a logo design for a static ad on one day and then work on a animated video on another. So, it's not so much that we're just doing graphics. It's not so rudimentary in that way. It's in the sense that, creative in the sense that we're solving creative problems no matter the medium.
There's a high level of creativity and there's a high level of art that goes with everything that you do almost, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So creativity, art, but it's ultimately a design process. What's the design process like for you? I mean, we talk about how, strategy is a critical part of every campaign we do, but the crucial role of design is just as critical. So how do you begin? Where do you get your inspiration from?
I think there's two parts to the process, essentially. Number one is just having an essential understanding of who the audience is and being able to communicate effectively through visual design. And two, just ensuring that the design serves a purpose. Between art and design, I think that's the biggest differentiator, is that art doesn't have to necessarily serve a purpose or communicate something. It can just be art, whereas design has to have a function and really be able to solve a problem for a brand or for any purpose.
So it's interesting. At the beginning, we talked about how what you do as a creative artist is much more than just design, but at the end of the day, it's still rooted in design, right? There's a design that's still rooted in what you do. So it's really a mix of all of those things, I guess.
Absolutely.
Business owners, we've talked about this a little bit, having Blair Peberty on, for example, previously, in Caitlin, our own creative strategist. They need to think of their business as a complete package, and each element has to be, work in synchronization and be in perfect balance so that everything can succeed rather than different things being in vacuums. And design is that element. It's one of those things that brings everything together. Why would you say it's important for businesses to ensure that there's a strong design throughout their brand?
I think that a branded presence is very important for a business. Oftentimes, a brand's consumers or customers it's their first impression. And if that impression is kind of lackluster or otherwise effective, your customers aren't going to give you a chance. I mean, not to be a design snob, but personally, when I've been to restaurants and I've looked at the menu and the menu is terrible, I jump to the conclusion that the food is probably terrible. And I probably don't order anything too ambitious because I don't have too much faith in the establishment. I mean, there's definitely a mental connection, I think, between how your brand is perceived through design. So I think that's why it's so important. That first impression is really critical.
Yeah, it's so interesting. But, we still, after years of being told not to, judge a book by its cover quite often as it relates to the brand or the menu or wherever it may be, right?
It's human nature.
Yeah. And brands are always looking to achieve that timeless look, that look and feel to their design, their overall aesthetic. And so it's an important thing to do. But why should brands also remember that they need to revisit that design and that look and that feel? And when do you think they should do that?
Visual trends and social movements are always evolving with the times. So I think design has to follow with that. A recent example of that is the Aunt Jemima rebrand for the maple syrup product. Essentially a brand that's existed over a century in North America, probably one of the most recognizable brands, is now going through the process of rebranding. I mean, that has to really be due to the fact that, they're trying to react to certain cues and certain social movements that are happening, especially in 2020, where racial inequality is one of the biggest topics. So I think businesses need to constantly be empathetic towards their customers and show that they understand them. And it's really just kind of always being on top of these type of trends, whether it's visual trends or what their audiences are feeling or, what you're communicating to them. I think often with the times, you're just keeping up with that.
Yeah. And I mean, you spoke to something that's obviously quite serious as far as, societal issues or systemic issues. But, there's even the reality that the times could just be that the business itself has evolved or the customer's desires have evolved. And so your brand needs to adapt or evolve in line with that other evolution, whether it's your own as a business or the consumers, right? And I think that, we hear it quite a bit when we first start working with a new client, that they think that their look, their feel, their brand, their aesthetic looks old. But at the end of the day, sometimes we settle on a very simple refresh because it still does a great job of communicating what they do or who they are. Whereas other times where it looks modern and flashy, it actually does a horrible job of it. So it's more about being in mind of the times, regardless of what that time speaks to, right? Societal or otherwise.
Absolutely. I mean, you want to make sure that your brand is still recognizable, but current and communicating messages that are relevant to the audience that you have now.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. As far as elevating design goes, consumers have a ton of choices when it comes to products and services. I mean, it's almost never ending these days. So that makes effective marketing an absolute essential necessity. Strong design is something brands need to have so that they stand out in the digital space, particularly. And I guess, you work a lot in the digital space. You work on a lot of the digital campaigns and ads that we put out there. Based on what you've seen, what do you think brands should be considering in order to elevate their design so that, they get noticed as opposed to that ad from their competitor that's right beside them?
I think the biggest thing is they really shouldn't be just following the norm, just kind of doing the cliche trends of just their industry. I think they need to think about what their competitors are doing and what they can do visually for their brand to stand out. I think the main goal of a strong design isn't necessarily just looking pretty. It has to do more than that. I think it needs to be able to tell a story, serve a purpose, and evoke some kind of emotion. I think those three things really help to make your brand memorable. It's something that, in today's world, we have so many distractions. We have such a lower attention span to what humans had 20 years ago. You get ads thrown you left, right, and center. There's a million websites. There's a million other businesses trying to compete for market share. So I think, having the ability to tell a story, serve a purpose, and evoke emotion is what will make you stand out. And also just knowing what your competitors are doing out in the market.
And do all of that in the 3 seconds that you have somebody's attention, right? It's easy.
Oh, it's simple. I'm just going to click the easy button. Like I do it every day. I'll push the pixels and it happens. But
I'm glad you have that button. That was a great investment that we bought. You've worked a lot with video, animation. We start to dive into things like augmented reality more recently. But, circling around video in and of itself, it's a great way to elevate what's on the surface. It reduces the amount of copy people have to read. It's a great way of visually storytelling. And if we look deeper into design, particularly designed by Skylar, we can see that there's layers of strategy within video and within animation and within, I guess, a lot of those tactics. What role do you think strategy plays, and how do you usually incorporate that into your design?
Yeah, just to talk about video as a platform, I think it's a really exciting medium in design. Like, I definitely didn't start out my career in video, but in recent years have definitely been evolving my skill set more towards it. And I think that being able to utilize different dimensions rather than just a static image, but being able to utilize things like sound, movement of graphics, there's so many more things that you can do that are more engaging to be able to tell that story that you want to tell. It's just so much more compelling compared to a static ad, depending on, or a static graphic, depending on what application you're talking about.
Right.
You think about how most people consume their content nowadays. It's on social media, and what's the first thing you see completely all over your feed? Video. It's all video. It's all being able to provide digestible information, and video just does that the best way possible because you're able to tell a story much quicker and much more engagingly with more elements to it.
Right.
And it really helps cook you in.
This has been really insightful, and I want to thank you for coming on. And I hope that people get a real sense for how important design and the strategy behind design. But ultimately how that leads to creative art, which is ultimately what it is that you do. And I hope that some of the things that you've spoken about, particularly as it relates to video and animation, stick with people. But if you just want to switch gears, I guess at the very end, we typically ask for a funny story, the more recent environment that we've had hitting us, working from home and whatnot. Do you have anything that you could share with us?
Currently, living in a rural area of Caledon. I work in the city, but then I live in a very rural area, so it's a nice contrast between lifestyles. Me at home, just working from home, minding my own business, and just hearing a chirping sound coming from somewhere, and I had no idea where it was coming from. With being stuck at home for so long, I thought I was literally going insane. Until I went upstairs to kind of discover what the sound was, and it's just a box of basically maybe over 30 chicklets with a baby turkey, two ducks, and just like a whole petting zoo in a box. Essentially, basically bought from the local farmer, from my mother-in-law who we live with. It's just one of those hilarious situations where I had no idea where the sound was coming from. So I was literally hearing Skylar birds in my head. Would
you say then that the chirping at home is a little more comfortable than the chirping that you get at the office?
I mean, definitely cuter. But, yeah, I would absolutely say bearable. Yeah, more bearable.
All right, fair enough. Well, Matt, listen, you're the target, but also the instigator of many chirps at the office. You've been doing great work. I know you're very excited that the Jays are rocking and rolling and finally strung a few W's together. So hopefully for you, they continue and they actually finish their season. But I want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank you for being a really important part of what Skylar has been doing, certainly over the last few years particularly. And I'm looking forward to a ton of exciting things to come.
Thank you, Kyle. It was a pleasure.
I hope you all enjoyed that. Matt, like I've said a few times, is an integral part of what we're doing at Skylar, and we're looking to be more creative, more innovative. We want to listen to the consumers, not just our customers, but their customers as well, and continue to push the envelope at what we deliver and deploy out there. So hopefully you'll be seeing more of Matt's work in the very near future. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bird's Eye View.